Hey all, my name is Emil Sjölander and I'm an engineering manager here at Figma. Hope you're having a great ViteConf. Today, I'm going to be talking about bringing developers into the design process. For those of you who don't know, Figma is a design platform for teams who build products together. It starts in FigJam, our online whiteboarding tool, where teams discover what to build, collaborate on ideas, brainstorming, and so forth. Then that moves into Figma Design, where designers and, as we'll talk about today, entire teams collaborate on getting to the details of what exactly to build. And this is done through pixel-perfect mockups, as well as really interactive prototypes and building design systems. And lastly, we have Dev Mode, which is going to be a big focus of this talk. Dev Mode is an entirely new space within Figma Design for developers to take those designs from design to production. At Figma, we believe developers are crucial to the design process. Developers aren't just there to implement designs once they have that final rubber stamp seal of approval. Developers are there to give feedback early on in the process, whether that's simply user feedback, like this design is confusing and could we try this alternative, to things like this option will be much quicker to implement and that way we can provide this value to users more quickly and ship faster, to just being a partner to designers in terms of being able to prototype out various design proposals quickly to get a sense for what to go with. We believe Figma has the opportunity to bridge the gap between designers and developers. We're building the tools that change the way we work, specifically with this in mind, bringing developers really much closer to the beginning stages of the design process. There's a couple of problems I want to cover today with design tools, as well as I'll cover kind of what we're doing at Figma to improve these aspects. The first problem we see is that design software is just not built for developers. And this shouldn't be too surprising. It is design software after all, and if you got to pick one user to kind of build the software for, first of all, it's going to be the designer. But as design software grows and gets adoption among designers, many more people come into that space. And that's a good thing. We want to include many more people in the design process than just the designer, everything from developers to marketing, legal, etc. This allows us to ship products quickly without delays and offer the best user experience for our customers in the end. Now, the problem is that design software typically just hides developer tools behind complex menus or puts them in overflow menus and so forth because they don't see developers as the core audience. Second problem is that designs don't easily translate to code. And I'm not talking about one-click, code's ready, you don't need to do any manual coding. I'm not talking about that. That works for some things, but I'm talking more generally around design and code, just thinking about things in different ways and having kind of a different perspective on the data model, where designers are thinking about vectors and groups and shapes. Developers are thinking about components, properties, accessibility, and a more kind of structured data model. Now, this can be hard to translate between the two, and we don't think it needs to be. And the third problem we see a lot is miscommunication, leading to mistakes and needing to go back and forth. So it's pretty common from what we've seen for designs to kind of be ready and then be shipped to developers, only to notice a problem due to lack of communication or miscommunication at the very end of the process. And then this all unravels and needs to go back to the design process because the developer wasn't in that process and communicating with the designers early on. This leads to worse products being shipped, or at the very least, products being shipped at a very delayed timeline. Here at Figma, we believe nothing great is made alone, and that includes design. So really, what we want to focus on is how we can bring developers into the design process much earlier on. Not just so developers can have a larger say, we think that's great as well, but really so that the end product that you deliver to customers can be better because there's more opinions and there's just more knowledge kind of built into that design. So how are we solving this? Well, first of all, we want to really make sure that Figma understands developer workflows and to do away with this notion of design software not being built for developers. This is something Figma's thought about for a really long time. Really, ever since Figma was launched, it was built on this concept that it's an online web-based design tool, because that way you can easily just send a link to a developer for quick feedback and collaboration, instead of having to send gigabyte large files and have the developer buy and download big pieces of software. But today, or earlier this year, we took a step further and launched Dev Mode. Dev Mode is a new space in Figma design for developers and designers to work more efficiently with each other, and for developers to more easily take designs from the design tool into production. As part of this kind of introduction of a new space, we were able to do some really great things, specifically around optimizing workflows, navigation, and features for the developer. So before Dev Mode, we really had one space for everybody. And that meant we always needed to make a trade-off between should we do what's best for the designer or what's best for the developer or for other folks. Now we don't need to do that trade-off anymore. We can do what's best for the designer in Figma Design. In Dev Mode, we can do what's best for the developer. So using kind of this new power of Dev Mode, we've really rethought navigation from the ground up and rebuilt everything from selection heuristics to how you pan and navigate the canvas and all of that. So now with Dev Mode, you can just find what you're looking for a lot faster and select layers with greater precision for implementation. We've also introduced specialized tools into Dev Mode that don't necessarily make sense for designers, and these are front and center in Dev Mode. For example, we have the component playground, which allows you as a developer to really understand the intent behind design system components by exploring their different states, variants, props, and so forth, rather than just looking at a picture of one specific kind of state of a component. You can really explore all the combinations it supports. And this allows you to build a better implementation, knowing the full scope of the component. And we also have tools for you to quickly adjust Dev Mode to show rems instead of pixels. And this is a setting you can easily toggle on any file, giving you the power to develop the way you want to develop. And this will be a common thread throughout Dev Mode, where we want it to be a customizable surface and customized to how you develop, and not just how one generic kind of developer develops, because we don't think that exists. On that note, we also have a ton of integrations built on our plugin platform. So for those who don't know, Figma has a really big plugin community and platform where you can build plugins private to your organization, but you can also build public plugins and publish them to the Figma community where others can find and install them. Here you can already install plugins for things like GitHub, Linear, Storybook, and really like many more tools. And they will integrate directly into Figma's Dev Mode to give you a really unified and integrated workflow. One way I really like using this is for Jira, because my team can go into a new design file for a new project we're doing. Instead of having the project management tool on like one screen, Figma on another, and copy paste between all of them and make sure everything is in sync, we can simply click on the things that need to be implemented in Figma and create issues directly from within Figma's Dev Mode. So we can all be on the same page about what needs to be done and what's already been completed. The next problem is that designs don't easily translate to code. And we want to shift this to Figma helping you write code. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean one click, you get all the code, you commit it, and that's it. We still believe that there's a lot of value in you writing code. That said, we all know there's a ton of tedious code to be written, styling specific gradients or just like doing the initial structure or like div structure for a complex layout. These are things that are not necessarily hard, but they're just tedious to do. And we think Figma can really help here. But Figma can also help by aligning the data model and the way of thinking between designers and engineers. And that's the first thing I'm going to talk about. Recently, Figma introduced variables and code syntax. In code, as developers, we typically don't say like background equals a specific hex color or padding equals 2 pixels. We say padding equals small padding or background equals secondary color. We use variables so that we're consistent and that we don't repeat ourselves or have hard-coded values. With variables in Figma, designers can now do the exact same thing. So that means that designers and developers share this mental model of reusable values. And these show up in the design and can be easily extracted in dev mode. And with variables, we've also introduced the ability for you to define code syntax for these variables in Figma. So if a variable in Figma is called brand color, you can say that, well, in code, we reference that as color.brand.primary or something like that. And you can define these on a per variable basis. So this is really great for keeping in sync between design and engineering. Next is CodeGen plugins. So CodeGen is what we call, well, code generation or the code snippets that we have in Figma. By default, Figma ships with code generation for CSS, Swift UI on iOS, and Compose on Android. And these built-in code generation is really powerful, and I personally find it really useful when dealing with things like box shadows or gradients, especially because the CSS syntax there can be quite complicated and I would need to Google the exact syntax. Now I can grab it from Figma and I know it's correct and represents the design. However, for more complex things, the out-of-the-box experience in Figma is not necessarily what I'm looking for, because it's not representing the frameworks, design systems, and components that I need to use day-to-day when programming. So here, CodeGen plugins are great because they allow you to configure dev mode to generate different code. And again, you can grab a ton of these from the Figma community to tailor the code generation of Figma to suit your needs, whether that's Next.js, Tailwind, Vue, or a bunch of iOS and Android frameworks as well. There's a ton of these out there, and you can configure them to produce the kind of code you want to use. In this image, we have Anima here that supports like HTML, CSS, React, Tailwind, and a ton more. And it's really great as a starting point. Again, these tools aren't necessarily meant to be just copy paste and you're done. They're there to remove a lot of the tedious kind of just like boilerplate that needs to be written. So for this, you can easily get started and then focus on the things that make your app unique and the optimizations you need to add after the fact. But this is a great starting point, and with plugins, you can really customize it to suit your needs. And again, here we also support private plugins. So organizations with their own design systems can easily write a CodeGen plugin so the code that's being suggested in dev mode matches the actual code you should be writing. So this is also a great way to enforce good practice in design system usage within your organization. And lastly, I want to talk about Figma for VS Code. So Figma for VS Code brings everything I've talked about into your editor as a kind of mini version of Figma running directly inside of VS Code. This is great for quickly kind of getting a reference to a value you're missing, double checking a design, responding or viewing a comment from your designer without kind of leaving the flow of VS Code. Additionally, with code generation, Figma for VS Code can autocomplete better code. So by default in Figma, or in VS Code, you're typing code and you get autocomplete suggestions. And those are fine, those are great, handy. But with Figma for VS Code, we inject the design context into those autocomplete suggestions. So if you're writing background : in CSS, we'll actually suggest background colors that we know exist in the design you're currently looking at within Figma. Lastly, I want to talk about the third problem I mentioned, which is miscommunication leading to mistakes. And here, we don't think we can solve all miscommunication, right? A tool can't do that. You still need to communicate well. But what Figma can do is add tools to assist that communication and help you be informed. The first such tool is Ready for Dev. Ready for Dev gives designers a simple tool to clearly communicate the status of a specific part of the design to the entire team all at once, making sure everybody's on the same page about what needs to be implemented. This is great, and especially in large files that can contain like hundreds of mockups and different variations. It's great for the whole team to know which part of this is actually ready to be implemented. And when something is ready for implemented, we all know it's not like final. Things get updated all the time, and it can sometimes be hard to know what's been updated. So a designer might come back to you after a week or two and say, I tweaked some stuff on the login page. And that's great. But now it's your job to figure out what tweaked some stuff actually means. Sometimes they might send you a changelog, but it typically doesn't encompass every single value because designers are just like human, right? They don't remember every single little tiny change they did. So with compare changes, this gives you a git diff style UI where you can get a full list of all the changes, regardless of how small they are. So if a light gray color became a different light gray, that can be really hard to see. But compare changes gives you that kind of checklist of all the changes. You can make sure to implement those when they happen, as opposed to getting a ticket assigned to you like 2 days before launch, and now you need to stress about that and implement that last minute. Again, leading to even more bugs. So we think this is great to make sure everybody's on the same page. So to recap, there's many problems facing developers when working with designs. Design software isn't built for devs, designs don't easily translate to code, and miscommunication leads to mistakes. With Dev Mode, Figma brings a developer focus to design tooling, with things like Ready for Dev to aid communication, Component Playground to bring really developer-centric tools into the mix, Code Gen plugins to really customize the experience to your needs and help you write less boilerplate, and Figma for VS Code to really bring design into the developer land instead of forcing developers to kind of go into the design land. You can try Dev Mode today. It's just flick the switch in the top right inside of Figma and let us know what you think. We're really open to feedback here. We're still in beta, so we're listening to customers every day, and I'd love to hear from you. And remember that nothing great is made alone. Thank you and have a great ViteConf.